Hi, I'm Greg Howlett, and I want to take just a few minutes to talk to you about my theory course. Now, theory, I know, sounds boring to a lot of you. Many of you think that there's really no reason to learn theory as a church pianist. But the reality is, theory is very helpful to church pianists. Rather than trying to convince you right now, what I'd like to do instead is actually show you the beginning of the course. We're actually going to take the first 5 minutes of the course, and you can listen and hear me explain why theory is something that you really need as a church pianist. So listen. Now, if you're like me, you grew up taking classical piano lessons, or maybe you're taking classical music lessons right now. I remember I started playing the piano at the age of 8, and I took piano from the lady that lived on the farm behind our farm. And every Monday, I remember walking through our field and then walking through her field to get her house and take my piano lesson. I remember that just like yesterday. But I remember something else too. Right before I started that trip every week, I remember getting out my theory book, because she would give a theory assignment every week, and I would wait till the last moment, and I'd go in there and run through it really quick and write in the answers, scribble in the answers. That was my first experience with theory. You know, in retrospect, I look back and I still see a real weakness there, because I had my theory and I had my piano music. You know, that's a real weakness of the way that we teach music in general that we're trying to address in this class. This class is called Music Theory You'll Actually Use, because very often we have our theory and then we have our music, but there's no way to combine them, no way to apply our theory to the music. And I grew up in that environment. I had my classical music. I forgot about theory all week long until the right before my lesson. I'd go in there and try to get it right so I could show it to my teacher. She'd check it off and give me another page or two of the theory book, and I'd forget about theory until the next week. It's a real problem for church pianists, especially because as improvisational pianists, we have to improvise. We don't have, in a lot of respects, we don't have a way of understanding and applying the theory that we may have learned back when we were in school. You know, we probably all learned theory. Most of you probably were like me. You had a theory book, but I look at it sort of like silos. You had a silo for theory. It was a small silo, and then over here you had your performance, your music that you performed. Those two silos were their own base of knowledge. They never talked to each other. That's not the way music is supposed to work. I have every reason to believe that's not the way Bach looked at music, or Beethoven, or any of the other masters. They had to understand theory when they wrote music. It's sort of sad that we've gotten to this point now where we believe that we can teach piano just by telling people to regurgitate the notes that are on a page. That's not the way it was probably done before the 20th century. We had to know how to improvise, and we did that with theory. But I grew up in that environment, as many of you have. And what happens is you get to a certain point in life where you realize that you don't play Bach very much. You don't play Beethoven. You end up playing Happy Birthday, or Trust and Obey, or Jesus Loves Me. Songs like that, simple songs, and you just play them in small settings. You play them in front of people. But you have to know how to improvise to do that. And that's when theory comes in handy. That's when we need to have theory and ability to also not only know theory, but the ability to apply it to our music. And that's what this course is about. Now, there's a lot of theory courses out there. There's websites about theory. There's books about theory. There's all kinds of ways to learn theory. So let me tell you why you should take this theory course. Of course, you've already bought it or you wouldn't be watching it, but I want to tell you why it's different. The reason it's different is because it comes from a position where we're going to give you only the theory you need to know, and we're going to give you ways to apply it to your music. Both of those things are very critical. Let me explain why. I grew up, like I said, in that environment. I learned basic theory, and I got to college and I took the beginning what do they call it, freshman music theory for a couple semesters, and then maybe sophomore music theory. I minored in music when I was in college, and I remember learning a lot of things. Again, I still didn't know how to apply them, but I learned a lot of things. Looking back at all the theory I've had across my life, I have to believe that a lot of it was unnecessary, at least for a performer. Now, if you're going to write books, you're going to teach in a college, if you're going to compose perhaps at a certain level, you may need to know some very vague aspects of theory. But there's a lot that's taught in a typical theory class that's not necessarily applicable to real life. So what I'm doing in this course is I've broken it down into some concepts that are necessary for you as an improvisational pianist in your church. Things you actually need to know. Things that will help you play the piano better. So we're going to eliminate a lot of things. Neapolitan chords, French sixths, things like that. We're not going to talk about in this course. They may be valuable in other settings. We're not going to talk about figured bass and things like that that may have been used in the past. We're going to talk about ways to play modern music in the 21st century. There's a lot of concepts that are helpful, they're nice to know, but they're not necessary for today. So I have streamlined the course only down to concepts that I actually use when I improvise. Now you may use other things, but I've sort of streamlined down to what I use, and you should have enough by the time you finish this course to have a base of knowledge that'll help you in how you improvise as well. Okay, hopefully that convinced you that theory is important. Let me take a few minutes and tell you what's in the course as well as what's not in the course. Remember, I said in the clip that you just saw that it's important to note that there are certain things that I left out of the course. Now, those things may be important in certain situations, but not necessarily in your situation as a church pianist. But what we do cover in this course, those concepts are very important. We start with scales, major and minor scales. Now, the goal there is not to get you ripping scales up and down the keyboard, but the reality is this: the degrees of scales, the notes that belong to scales, those are foundational to many important theory concepts. So we have to talk about scales, major and minor scales. We talk about simple triads. We talk about inverting those triads. We talk about things like seventh chords, meaning we add a fourth note to those chords. And then we go beyond that to extended chords, which are chords that have ninths and 11ths and 13ths. We talk about the relationship between those chords and the scale, the diatonic chords. We talk about secondary dominants, the most common chord by far in church music beyond the 1, 4, and 5 chords, if you're familiar with 1, 4, and 5 chords. We talk about the circle of fifths, progressions based on the circle of fifths. And we also talk about a concept that's very, very important but not taught very much, and it's called functional harmony. I'm going to show you a clip in a second, but let me explain what functional harmony is very briefly. Functional harmony refers to the study of the way chords interact with each other. In other words, if you have a particular chord, where does it want to resolve, or does it need to resolve? How do chords move? That's the study of functional harmony. It's fascinating, but more importantly, it's very, very helpful to church pianists. Listen. Functional harmony, the study of how chords work with each other. How do they interact? Sort of like chemistry of chords. If you put two chords together, how are they going to react? That's sort of what we're talking about when we talk about functional harmony. This is a subject for some reason that you don't hear much about, you don't read much about. But for an improvisational pianist, this is an important issue. Let's start on page 25. First of all, I want to go through some basic rules of the way chords like to move, such as this first one, which is chords like to move down by fifths. Now, some of you are thinking, well, big deal. We learned that a couple lessons ago, right? We went through a lot of progressions. We did this progression right here. We already know that chords like to move in fifths. I just wanted to say it again. So chords like to move in fifths. Even though we learned it back then, it's very, very important. That's the most natural way that chords like to move. When in doubt, chords are going to move by fifths, and they're going to move in fifths down. Now, that's the key thing. Not up, down by a fifth. They roll this way around the circle of fifths, counterclockwise. I'm just realizing that's clockwise for you. But normally, when you see a circle of fifths chart, you're going to go counterclockwise from C down to F down to B flat. Or if you like it better, you could say chords like to move up by a fourth. That's the same thing. But don't move. When you're writing and you're doing things, you know, some of you may be writing music now. Be careful about that. Basically, this chord, this last section, is going to help you write progressions that make logical sense from a musical standpoint. Don't write progressions where the chords don't move in natural ways. Don't write progressions where you move up around in fourths, or excuse me, down by a fourth. You can move up by a fourth because up by a fourth happens to be down by a fifth. But
don't write in the wrong direction. Write where your chords are moving around the circle of fifths down. The other way chords like to move that we know is in steps. Now, when we say in steps, we mean either whole steps or half steps, either up or down. Doesn't matter to me. Up or down, whole steps or half steps. Now, that's not a good hard, fast rule. There's going to be exceptions, and we're going to go over a lot of exceptions here over the next few minutes. Your ear has to be your guide. That's not to say that every single chord always will resolve up or down, half steps or whole steps, but that's a good rule of thumb. If you're just sitting at the piano trying to come up with cool progressions, the good thing to do is to work up and down, work up and down in steps. You move from one chord, then try to find a chord that's close to it, either up or down, and chances are you're going to find something almost all the time. Now, you have what you need to understand this. We've talked about our diatonic chords, so when I start talking in just a second, I'm going to talk about 1 and 4, and we've learned all this. So you're ready for it. Don't be intimidated by the concept. We're going to talk about a lot of things that might get just a little bit deep, but you can do it. You can stick with it. You've stuck with me this far, and you'll be able to get this as well. I want to talk about one quick other thing before we get started in specific rules, and that is functional equivalence. Functional equivalence refers to the fact that some chords are the same chord as other chords. There are certain chords that we like to say are equal to other chords. For example, 2 and 5 are considered functionally equivalent chords. Now, when I first started hearing that, I thought, well, what could that possibly mean? Obviously, a 2 chord is different than a 5 chord. And it is. But when we talk about functional equivalence, what we mean is those 2 chords like to resolve to the same place. They like to go to the same place. They act the same way in a progression. If they both want to go to the same place, they're equivalent. And as it turns out, both 5 and both 2 and 5, like to resolve to 1. They're functionally equivalent. We call them equivalent. Basically, those chords are interchangeable. There's other functional equivalent chords too. The 7 half diminished is also functionally equivalent to the 5. 2, 5, and 7 half diminished are functionally equivalent. 3 and 1. 3 and 1 are functionally equivalent. Basically, anytime you have a 1 chord, you can play a 3 chord. Anytime you have a 2 chord, you can play a 5, or vice versa. Anytime you have a 7, you can play a 5. You can change a 7 for a 5. These are sort of interchangeable chords because they all want to go to the same place. They resolve the same way. So they're functionally equivalent. And then 4 and 6. 4 and 6 are considered functionally equivalent too. Now, a lot of people take that and these kind of concepts and use them for chord substitutions. That's why, for example, or one of the big reasons why, you can often substitute a 3 chord for a 1 chord. Or you can substitute a 2 for a 5 or a 7 for a 5. It comes back to these rules or the way that chords like to work. There's other functional equivalent chords too, but they're rather advanced and we won't get into them at this point. Now, let's get into some specifics. What I want you to do over the next few minutes is start to prime your pump so that when you leave this course, you can go out and sort of figure out, look at harmony and understand why it's doing what it's doing in songs, and maybe in some cases even look for ways to improve it.
All right, hope you enjoyed that little clip from the study of functional harmony. I want to leave you with just a few thoughts. Number one, theory is of no value if you can't apply it. Now that's the problem for many of us. We had theory growing up, but we never learned to apply it to our music. You'll never be able to use theory unless you know it not only well, but you know it pretty much in your sleep. I say know it cold. You know it to the point where you can just use it without thinking. You have to get that to that point. Now this course has, I hate to tell you this, but this course has homework assignments and there's work involved. But the goal is to get you to the point where you can play these chords and use this theory in your sleep. If you can use it that way, you'll be able to apply it instinctively to your music. In other words, if I tell you play a C major 7th with a sharp 11, you basically have to play that, right away. If you can't play that right away, if you have to think about it, you don't know it well enough to use it in a song. You don't have the luxury of stopping in the middle of a song and thinking, okay, what is a sharp 11 in a C chord? So The homework assignments are designed to help you get to the point where you know these concepts cold. That's the goal of the course, to teach you theory that's useful and get you to the point where you can actually use it in your music. So if you find yourself needing a refresher course on theory, and most of us do, please consider taking this course, especially before you take some of the more advanced courses at greghowlett.com.